Today I'm going to be talking about the Billings Maniac murders, aka the axe murders that happened over a century ago. This is an unsolved and extremely brutal slaughter of a homicide, and it actually took the lives of a mother and a father of 4 children. So this is really traumatic. However, I was able to find an interview with a grandson of, these people that ended up losing their lives, and he actually had a pretty hopeful message for the end of the video. But with this being Montana After Midnight, where we talk about the craziest, scariest, most interesting things that happened in Montana, I wanted to talk about the Billings axe murderers, otherwise known as the work of a maniac. This was about a century ago in 1924, and on December 6, 1924, Nels and Annie Anderson kissed their 4 children goodbye, leaving for a pretty routine day of work. And over the day, everything seemed normal to their nanny/neighbor, Annie Erickson, who only got cause for concern as it turned to nighttime and the Andersons did not return home for the night. It wasn't until the next morning that Annie Erickson ended up calling the police and telling them that, hey, something isn't right here. I think you should look into where the Andersons are at. So the police eventually made their way to their barbershop/beauty parlor that they ran as a family business, where they found the Andersons' car sitting out in the parking lot. Not a huge cause for concern at that point, showed that they were looking in the right direction, as a person's not going to be too far away from their vehicle. So they peered inside the barbershop, where they saw Nell's arm slumped over a chair. From there, that's pretty much all they could see, but that gave them enough cause for concern to bust straight through into the building to make sure that everything was okay. Unfortunately for everyone involved, things were not okay inside of the barbershop. When they walked in, they found Nels Anderson's body slumped over that chair, hand dangling off, but most prominently, his head split from the crown all the way down to the roof of his mouth. Now, this is a horrific scene to find somebody in, but some other details of the scene were that he was wearing one glove with one glove off and in his outside coat. So in my mind, when I'm painting the picture of this scene or this area, either Nels and Annie had just came into the barbershop or they were just about to leave. Now, there's some other context clues that point to one that come up later in the story. Now that they had found Nell's body, their mission was to find out what happened to his wife, mother of his children, Annie Anderson. As they moved on looking for Annie, they got to the beauty parlor section of the building, where they found pools of blood and a bag of groceries that was drenched in what we can assume to be Annie's blood. While they found this horrific scene that painted a story of them getting groceries and then walking back into their barber shop, they could not find Annie's body until they went all the way outside into a shed. And in the shed, they found Annie, again with attack to her head noticeable, but also 3 big lacerations to her body. She, just like Nels, was in her outside clothes, big coat, ready for the winter environment, and she was clearly killed in the barbershop and then dragged to the shed. Right next to Annie's body, the police located the murder weapon, which was an axe that was actually the Andersons' own property, something that they would use to split wood in the winter. One thing of note is that the axe's handle was cleanly wiped off and there was no evidence left on the axe. While there is so much brutality and passion clearly involved in this, killing somebody with an axe, swinging an axe into a woman's body 4 times, the killer was smart enough to wash his hands in the sink, leave no trace behind, and even clean up his fingerprints on the axe, which I didn't even know that fingerprint technology was developed back then, but apparently police were still checking for fingerprints and none came up. Since we're talking about the condition of Nels and Annie's bodies, I'm going to read you this quote from this book that I've been reading. It's Montana Murderers. I also talked about Turkey Pete in my Montana State Prison video, but this is a book that I've gotten that just talks about some of the craziest murder cases that happen in Montana. And well, I found this case from this book. I actually did most of my research online, but I did find a really good quote from this book, which is actually a quote from the Great Falls Tribune, which is another town in Montana. And the quote apparently goes, "His head," talking about Nels, "was split from the crown to the roof of his mouth, while his wife bore at least 3 axe wounds, the deepest of which almost split the skull in twine." So that's clearly extremely brutal, and a lot of passion must have went into this murder, or like most of the news articles at the time were saying, that this was clearly the work of a maniac, a frenzied person coming in that just enjoys slaughtering people. But then at the same time, the murderer was thorough and thoughtful enough to clean up after himself. Another thing that added a little bit of mystery to these murders is that the bodies were not robbed, the cash register was not disturbed. Everything in the building seemed to be untouched except for that beauty parlor section where Annie unfortunately lost her life. From here, it was the police's job to solve what happened to the Andersons and find some justice for their murders. Now, like I mentioned, there was no sign of robbery, and apparently there was no one in the Andersons' life that would make sense to want to hurt them. So they kept looking into other leads. Now, apparently, there was one lead that surfaced from a woman who across the street had heard yelling coming from the barbershop at around 9 p.m. the night before on December 6th. This person was also able to see inside the barbershop and described a tall, yelling, darker complexion man, maybe of Mexican descent, yelling at the Andersons, getting into a little kerfuffle. But this lead eventually did fizzle, and no darker complexion man was ever questioned about this. One thing I will note, many sources that I looked into, including articles that I read and the story from this book, reference how the police at the time were quoted as saying that the nature of this crime did not seem to align with what they thought a Mexican perpetrator would do, saying that Mexicans were more inclined to use a pistol or a knife and not use an axe in a murder. Now, of course, this is kind of a silly notion. Anyone of any race can kill anybody else in any kind of way. There was just a weird prejudice saying that a Mexican man would not kill a person with an axe. He would actually kill them with a knife or a pistol. I was just like a little silly, like, no, only white dudes kill people with axes. Now, the most prominent theory that the police were able to come up with at the time was that someone from their city definitely did not cause these murders, but there was a train track that was near to the barbershop. So what they presumed happened was that a crazed man hopped on a train, rode all the way through Billings, and then went on his killing spree, killing the Andersons in their barbershop in an act of barbarousness and just straight craze. Literally the work of a maniac. And just as quickly as he rode into Billings on a train, he hopped on the next one straight out of town, getting out scot-free, running away onto the next town to cause more mania. Now, as time passed, the Andersons' children are unfortunately all gone now. Like I mentioned, this happened over a century ago at this point. But in 2024, for the 100-year anniversary of this unfortunate event, one of their grandchildren did come to the town and actually visit the graves of Nels and Annie Anderson and had some pretty honestly hopeful things to say. That grandson is Glenn Pomeroy, and he had a vested interest in keeping their memory alive and putting some love, memory, and careful thought into their name. After doing kind of a deep dive into this senseless, brutal crime that is still unsolved to this day, it was kind of a relief to see their grandson visit their graves, put respect on their memory, and have such a vested interest in his grandparents. He also discussed how his mom would talk to him with such fond memories of her parents, which would of course be Nels and Annie Anderson, and it was a very nice, warm moment to think of the light and the good side of their family and not necessarily the tragic murders of his grandparents. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this case is unsolved, and unfortunately no one was ever convicted of these brutal murders that took place in Billings, Montana just over a century ago. Thinking back, it's actually, we're in between the 100th and 101st anniversary of this murder, so I still caught it when it was exactly 100 years old. And like I mentioned, I originally got this idea from this book, even though I did most of my research online. But this book is filled with solved and unsolved mysteries. I think if I make a video like this in the future, I'll do like maybe 3 unsolved cases, just so it's a little bit more cathartic, because just having a case that is unsolved, I think, leaves a lot hanging in the air. Regardless, I hope you did enjoy this video. What do you guys think happened? Supposedly, this couple had no enemies, and a lot of people in the community vouched for them. Something that was said by their grandson in the video that I watched, where he was talking about his grandparents and his mother, the way he described them opening up their barbershop business was because they strolled into town and noticed a lot of folks that could use a shave and a haircut, so they opened up a barbershop. And I think it's a very Montana thing to do. Show up to your community, do what needs to be done of you, and really provide for the people around you. That was up until 1924, where they were sadly taken from their community and their 4 young children. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Devin. This is Montana After Midnight, and I'm gonna quickly bug you about these hoodies. I recently just made these that seem cooler back. I designed this to have something to wear myself, and I just noticed that a couple of my family members just bought some, so that's really sick. So did my friend Daniel. Shout out Daniel for being my first customer. And if you really enjoy these videos, consider buying one of these, and it'll help support me, I guess. Anyway, enough of that silly business. If you want to see any more Montana After Midnight, make sure you're subscribed, or check out the video that I'm gonna leave at the end of this one.